He can't even support himself. My own son humiliated me in court, but the truth exploded. He can't even support himself. Look at him." Michael's voice echoed through the courtroom as he pointed at me as if I were some kind of zoo animal. My own son, my firstborn, the boy I held in trembling hands the day he was born, was now standing there, trying to humiliate me in front of strangers. My father lives in a house that's falling apart, barely has food in the refrigerator, and just yesterday, my son found him talking to himself in the garden. He's completely senile, incapable of taking care of himself. The words came like stabs, one after another. I felt the judge's pitying gaze upon me, a 71-year-old man, hunched over, wearing a suit that no longer fit as well as it did a few years. "Go." Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, nodded vigorously beside Michael, her expression a mixture of false concern and poorly disguised satisfaction. My grandson Nathan, only 16, looked at the floor embarrassed. I couldn't hold back the tears that silently rolled down my wrinkled face. They weren't tears of sadness, they were of disappointment. In 71 years of life, I never imagined my own flesh and blood would drag me to a courtroom in Portland to try to declare me incompetent. The pain was almost physical. I took a deep breath and looked at the back door of the courtroom. Where was Thomas? He promised he would be here. If he didn't arrive soon, I would lose everything, not just my assets, but my dignity, my independence. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:43 in the morning. Time was running out. I'll never forget the day Susan died. My wife of 47 years passed away after a 3-year battle with cancer. It was exactly 2 years ago. We were in our house, in Portland, the same house we bought when we got married. Susan always wanted to move to something more modern, but I insisted on staying. It wasn't out of stubbornness or being old-fashioned, as Michael always insinuated. That old house with its uneven garden and peeling paint was my best camouflage. You would imagine that a millionaire lived there, and that was exactly the idea. I spent 4 decades building a real estate empire that spanned 8 different states. I started small, saving every penny I earned as an accountant. My first investment was a cheap piece of land on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. At the time, it seemed crazy. It was just sand and cacti, far from everything. Susan almost left me when she found out I had invested our savings in it. Today, that same land is worth 400 times what I paid. Urbanization arrived, and my madness turned into one of the most lucrative investments of my life. Then came the apartments in Boston, the houses in Seattle, the commercial buildings in Chicago, the beachfront properties in Los Angeles, and much more. Each deal was done discreetly, through different companies, trusts, and foundations. Only one person besides Susan knew the extent of my fortune: Thomas Wilson, my accountant and financial advisor for 25 years. My son Michael grew up believing we were a middle-class family. This was a conscious decision that Susan and I made. We wanted our son to develop character, work ethic, his own values. We didn't want to raise a spoiled heir who would expect everything to be handed to him on a silver platter. Perhaps we went too far with this philosophy. Michael grew up resentful of our apparent lack of ambition. He saw his friends' parents buying new cars, taking extravagant trips, while we continued in our modest house with our 5-year-old car. When he graduated from college, which we paid for in full, though he thinks they were student loans that we paid off for him, Michael distanced himself. He moved to the other side of the country, to New York, determined to be successful, as he put it. He built a career in finance, married Jennifer, an ambitious woman who never hid her disappointment with her unambitious in-laws. They had Nathan, my only grandson, and for years our contact was limited to occasional holiday visits and polite but distant phone calls. Everything changed when Susan died. Suddenly, Michael began to show a renewed interest in my life. Weekly calls, more frequent visits. I naively believed that his mother's death had made him realize the importance of family. How foolish I was. The first time I realized Michael's true intentions was 6 months after Susan's funeral. He came with Jennifer for a weekend in Portland. Sitting in my living room between sips of coffee, Michael began to talk about my options. "Dad, this house is too big for you now. It's requiring too much maintenance. You should consider selling it and moving to a smaller apartment, maybe even a retirement community." Jennifer agreed energetically. "It would be much safer for you, William, and think about the money from the sale. It could help you live more comfortably." Her eyes sparkled as she talked about the hot real estate market in Portland and how my house, despite being old, was in a desirable neighborhood. I responded vaguely, saying I would think about it. In truth, I had no intention of getting rid of the house, not out of emotional attachment, although that existed too, but because I knew that look in Jennifer's eyes well. It was the same look I had seen in so many eyes over decades in the real estate market. It was greed, pure and simple. The conversation repeated itself in subsequent visits, each time more insistent. Michael began bringing brochures from retirement communities, making comments about my limited budget and how selling the house could give me financial security. I continued to deflect. Then they changed tactics. The insinuations about my mental health began. First came subtle comments. "Dad, did you forget to pay the electric bill again? Or are you eating properly? Your refrigerator is almost empty." I had never forgotten to pay a bill in my life, and my refrigerator was empty because I had donated most of the food to a needy family in the neighborhood, something I did regularly but didn't comment on to anyone. Then came the more serious concerns. Michael began calling my neighbors, asking if they had noticed any strange behavior from me, like talking to myself in the garden, when in fact I was on the phone with my brokers using a Bluetooth earpiece, or buying excess food that supposedly went bad, when in fact I was buying to donate. Things got worse when Nathan came to spend 2 weeks with me during summer vacation. He's a good boy, but he had clearly been instructed by his parents to observe my behavior. One night, as we talked about his future, I mentioned that he shouldn't worry about money for college. "I have some secrets saved up that might help," I said, thinking of revealing part of the truth about my financial situation. The next day, I received an angry call from Michael. "What do you mean by saved up secrets? Are you filling my son's head with promises you can't keep?" That's when I realized Nathan was reporting everything back to his parents. The trap was being set around me and I needed to act. I called Thomas immediately. "They're trying to declare me incompetent," I said, without beating around the bush. Thomas was silent for a moment before responding. "Do you think they've discovered your assets?" "No," I replied. "I think they have their eye on the house. Michael and Jennifer are having financial problems. He lost his job 6 months ago and is working at something temporary that pays much less. Jennifer had to reduce her hours at the law firm to take care of Nathan, who has been having problems at school. They sold their apartment in New York and are renting something smaller. I believe they see my house as a lifeline." Thomas sighed. "What do you want to do, William?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "Nothing yet. I want to see how far they'll go." I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, I received a summons. Michael was filing for guardianship, claiming I was incapable of managing my own affairs due to significant cognitive decline. The hearing was scheduled for a month from then. I called Thomas again. "Time to prepare our counterattack," I said. "Gather all the documentation. I want them to know exactly who they're trying to deceive." The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. I entered the courtroom alone, deliberately unshaven, wearing my oldest suit, which no longer fit so well. If Michael wanted to present me as a senile and neglected old man, I would give him exactly that image. I saw the surprise in his eyes when I entered without a lawyer. "Where is your legal representative, Mr. Anderson?" asked the judge, a middle-aged man named Douglas Hartman. "I didn't think it necessary, Your Honor," I replied, with a deliberately trembling voice. "I believe I can speak for myself." Michael's lawyer, an expensive-suited man named Richard Barnes, smiled with satisfaction. Everything was going according to their plan. Michael was the first to testify. That's when he stood up and uttered those words that opened my narrative. "He can't even support himself. Look at him." Public humiliation was apparently part of the strategy, make me look so pathetic that the judge would have no choice but to grant guardianship to Michael. My son continued, "My father lives in deplorable conditions. The house is falling apart. There are leaks in the roof. The electrical wiring is old and dangerous. He refuses to make repairs or hire help. He has no visible income besides his retirement, which barely covers his basic expenses. We found unpaid bills piled up on his desk." Every word was a lie or a gross distortion of the truth. My house was old, yes, but perfectly safe and well maintained on the inside. I deliberately left the exterior looking more worn. The unpaid bills were, in fact, duplicates that I kept for record-keeping purposes, but I let Michael continue. "In recent visits, we've noticed increasingly erratic behaviors," he went on, now with an expression of fake concern. "My father talks to himself in the garden, often for hours. He buys excess food that ends up spoiling because he forgets he already has the same items at home. He shows signs of paranoia, mentioning secrets to my son, his grandson." Michael paused dramatically, looking directly at the judge. "And most concerning, Your Honor, is that he consistently refuses our help. We've offered financial support, suggested he move to a smaller and safer place, tried to hire a nurse to help him a few hours a week. He rejects everything. This is not the behavior of someone capable of making rational decisions about their own life." Jennifer testified next, corroborating everything Michael had said and adding her own examples of my supposed decline. Then it was Nathan's turn. My heart tightened at seeing my grandson put in that position. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding looking directly at me as he repeated the incidents he had observed during his stay. The talking to myself, the excess food, the mentioned secrets. Michael's lawyer then called an expert, a psychiatrist who had never examined me but who, based on the testimonies he had just heard, stated that I presented classic signs of early-stage dementia. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, still playing the role of the fragile old man. "Your Honor," I began in a low voice, "I appreciate your patience in listening to me. I know I don't look very impressive here today. I'm old, tired, and yes, sometimes forgetful. I lost my wife 2 years ago, and I must admit I haven't been the same since." And as I paused, noticing the discreet smiles exchanged between Michael, Jennifer, and their lawyer, they thought I was digging my own grave. "However," I continued, now with a slightly firmer voice, "I would like to ask if I may call a witness before you make your decision." The judge looked surprised. "Mr. Anderson, you should have normally informed us of this beforehand, but given the circumstances, I'll allow it. Who is your witness?" At that moment, the back door of the courtroom opened, and Thomas Wilson entered carrying a thick folder. "Your Honor, I would like to call Mr. Thomas Wilson, my accountant and financial advisor for the past 25 years. Michael's lawyer immediately stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. We were not informed about this witness. Besides, an accountant is hardly qualified to speak about Mr. Anderson's mental capacity." The judge considered for a moment. "I'll allow the testimony, Mr. Barnes. I want to hear all relevant information before making a decision as serious as this one. However, the testimony must be limited to facts relevant to the case." Thomas walked to the witness stand, carrying his folder. After taking the oath, he sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at me, with a slight smile. I nodded, giving him permission to reveal everything. "Mr. Wilson," the judge began, "I understand that you are Mr. Anderson's accountant. What can you tell us that is relevant to this case?" Thomas opened the folder. "Your Honor, I have been William Anderson's accountant and financial advisor since 1999. I would like to present documentation that I believe is highly relevant to the allegations made in this court today." He began to remove documents from the folder. "What I have here are financial statements, property deeds, rental contracts, valuation reports, and other documents that conclusively demonstrate that Mr. Anderson is not only financially stable, but extremely successful." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Michael leaned forward with a confused expression. "Specifically," Thomas continued, "Mr. Anderson has a current net worth of approximately $75 million. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear Jennifer audibly gasp. "This wealth includes real estate properties in 8 different states, including apartment buildings in Boston valued at $18 million, vacation homes in Seattle worth $9 million, commercial properties in Chicago generating monthly rents of $50,000, land in Arizona that has appreciated 400% in 10 years, 3 beachfront properties in Los Angeles, 2 villas in Washington, and a commercial building in Atlanta." Thomas paused, looking directly at Michael, whose face had lost all color. "Additionally, Mr. Anderson maintains diversified investments in mutual funds, treasury bonds, and selected company stocks. His monthly passive income exceeds $40,000. Thomas then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, far from being an elderly man unable to support himself, Mr. Anderson is one of the most astute real estate investors I have ever known. Just in the last 6 months, he concluded a negotiation that resulted in a 20% return in 90 days. A remarkable feat, even for much younger market professionals." Judge Hartman looked at the documents that Thomas had handed to the court officer, who was now passing them to him. His expression visibly changed as he examined each page. "Mr. Wilson," the judge finally said, "these documents appear to be in order. But this raises the question. Why does Mr. Anderson live as described by his son?" Thomas smiled. "If I may, Your Honor, I believe Mr. Anderson can best answer that question." The judge nodded, turning to me. "Mr. Anderson?" I stood up, this time without pretending fragility. My posture was erect, my voice clear and firm. "Your Honor, I've lived in the same house for nearly 5 decades by choice, not necessity. My wife Susan and I made a conscious decision to live modestly, despite our growing fortune. We wanted our son, Michael, to grow up with solid values, to learn the value of hard work, to develop his own character without the corrosive influence of easy wealth." I looked directly at Michael as I spoke. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open in shock. "As for the specific allegations made today, yes, I talk to myself in the garden because I'm often on business calls using a Bluetooth earpiece. I buy excess food because I regularly donate to needy families in my neighborhood, something I've done for years without fanfare. The secrets mentioned to my grandson were simply my intention to reveal to him that I could help with his college education when the time was right." The courtroom remained in absolute silence as I continued. "Your Honor, I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself and my affairs. In fact, I continue to actively manage my investment portfolio, making daily decisions that affect millions of dollars. The only reason I am here today is because my son and his wife are facing serious financial difficulties and saw my house, which they presume to be my only significant asset, as a solution to their problems." Michael's lawyer stood up abruptly. "Objection! This is slanderous and speculative." The judge raised his hand. "Mr. Anderson, do you have evidence to support this allegation?" I nodded. Thomas, please. Thomas removed a few more documents from his folder. Your Honor, as part of my work for Mr. Anderson, I keep myself informed about potential risks to his investments, including family situations that could lead to legal disputes like this one. I have here public records showing that Mr. Michael Anderson lost his job at Blackwell Investments approximately 6 months ago. His mortgage in New York was 3 payments behind before they sold the apartment. Currently, they are renting a residence for a significantly lower amount. Additionally, there are records of at least 2 substantial personal loans obtained in the last 4 months. Michael rose furiously. This is an invasion of privacy. How dare you investigate my financial life? The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Anderson, please control yourself, or I'll have to ask you to leave the courtroom. Michael sat down, his face red with anger and shame. Judge Hartman examined the documents for a few more minutes before looking at me. Mr. Anderson, William, I must say I am impressed with your mental clarity and the meticulous documentation you have presented. It is quite clear to me that you are not only capable of managing your own affairs, but do so with remarkable skill. He then turned to Michael. As for this guardianship petition, it is categorically denied. Furthermore, I am concerned about the nature of the allegations made here today and the motivations behind them. The judge looked at me again. Mr. Anderson, do you wish to proceed with any legal action against your son for these false allegations? I considered for a moment. The truth is that despite everything, Michael was still my son. I was deeply hurt, yes, but I didn't want to destroy him. Not at this time, Your Honor. However, I would like to request a temporary restraining order against Michael and Jennifer, and supervised visits when it comes to my grandson, Nathan. The judge nodded. Granted. I will issue a temporary restraining order, valid for 30 days, during which you can decide if you wish to make it permanent. As for visits with your grandson, I suggest you seek specific legal counsel on how to proceed, given that the young man is a minor and under the legal custody of his parents. He banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. When I turned to leave, I saw Michael still sitting, apparently stunned by what had happened. Jennifer was beside him, crying quietly. Nathan looked confused and scared. Part of me wanted to go to them, try to explain, maybe even offer help. Despite everything, they were still family. But another part, the part that had been deeply wounded by the betrayal, stopped me. Instead, I walked over to Thomas and shook his hand firmly. Thank you, old friend, he smiled. Just doing my job, William. And I must say it was a particular pleasure today. We left the courtroom together, leaving behind the wreckage of what was once my family. In the weeks that followed, I made several changes in my life. First, I modified my will. Michael would no longer be my primary beneficiary. Instead, I established educational funds for Nathan and redirected most of my fortune to carefully selected charitable organizations. I kept a modest provision for Michael. After all, he was still my son, but nothing near what he would have originally received. Next, I hired a lawyer specializing in family law to evaluate my options regarding Nathan. My grandson was an innocent victim in this situation. He had been manipulated by his father to provide evidence against me, without fully understanding what was happening. After consultations with psychologists and social workers, I filed for regular unsupervised visits with Nathan. To my surprise, 3 weeks after the hearing, I received a call from Nathan. He was crying. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what they were doing. Dad told me you were sick and needed help, that observing your behavior was for your own good." I tried to calm him, assuring him that I didn't blame him. "You're young, Nathan. Your parents are your authority. It's natural for you to trust them." He sniffled. "They're fighting all the time now. Dad is yelling at Mom about money, and she blames him for everything going wrong." I felt a pang of guilt, not for defending myself, but for knowing that my grandson was suffering the consequences. "Nathan, would you like to come stay with me for a while?" I asked impulsively. There was a moment of silence. "Can I really?" The hope in his voice was palpable. "Of course you can. I'll talk to my lawyer to see how we can arrange this legally." In the end, it was easier than I expected. Michael and Jennifer were facing their own legal battles now. Judge Hartman had referred the case to the district attorney, who was considering charges of attempted fraud and financial elder abuse. They were desperate to avoid criminal charges and quickly agreed to a deal that included probation, community service, and, significantly, allowing Nathan to come live with me temporarily while they sorted out their problems. 3 months after the hearing, Nathan moved into my house. For the first time since Susan's death, the house felt alive again. I hired a housekeeper to help with household chores and cooking, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to ensure that Nathan had a stable and comfortable environment. I enrolled him in a good private school in Portland. In the evenings, we shared dinners where we talked about his day, his interests, his dreams for the future. Slowly, I began to reveal more about my life, my business, how I built my fortune. Not to impress him, but to educate him. "Grandpa, why did you never tell Dad about your money?" Nathan asked one night as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. I sighed. "It was a decision your grandmother and I made together. We thought we were doing the right thing, that we were giving your father the chance to develop his own character, his own values, without the influence of easy money." I shook my head. "But now I wonder if we made a mistake, if we created a man so obsessed with financial status and material security precisely because he never felt he had enough." Nathan was silent for a moment. "Do you think he knew? About your money, I mean?" It was my turn to reflect. "No, I don't think he knew the extent, but I suspect he always felt there was more to our life than we showed. Children are perceptive." I looked at my grandson, so young and already so marked by the choices of the adults around him. "Nathan, I promise I will always be honest with you. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes." Meanwhile, Michael and Jennifer were facing the consequences of their actions. Michael received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service in a nursing home, an irony that was not lost on anyone. Jennifer received a similar sentence and had her professional license temporarily suspended. They were forced to sell their house to pay fines and legal fees. With part of the money I had set aside for Michael in my modified will, I decided to establish the Anderson Foundation with an initial capital of $250,000. The foundation's goal was to help elderly victims of family financial abuse, a much more common problem than I imagined, as I discovered during my research. Thomas Wilson agreed to serve on the foundation's board, along with 2 lawyers specializing in elder law and a social worker with vast experience in the area. The foundation quickly became a renewed purpose for me, a way to transform my painful experience into something positive that could help others. Approximately 6 months after the hearing, I received an unexpected call. It was Michael's therapist. "Mr. Anderson, your son would like to schedule a joint session with you in my office. He's working on his recovery process and would like to speak with you as part of that. Would you be willing to participate?" I hesitated. The wound of betrayal was still open, throbbing painfully whenever I thought about what Michael had tried to do. Part of me wanted to refuse, to say it was too late for reconciliations. But then I thought of Nathan, of the glimmer of hope in his eyes when we talked about the possibility of his family healing someday. "When would this session be?" I finally asked. "Next Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, if that's convenient for you," replied Dr. Philip Myers, his voice professional and neutral. I mentally consulted my schedule. I had a call with my property managers in Chicago, but I could reschedule. "I'll be there," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness of my decision. On Thursday, I arrived at Dr. Meyer's office 15 minutes before the scheduled time. It was a modern building in downtown Portland with an elegant but welcoming waiting room. I sat down, absently flipping through a magazine while I waited, my stomach tense with anxiety. What did Michael want? Was it another attempt at manipulation? Or was he really trying to fix something of what had been broken between us? The door opened, and Michael entered. He looked different, thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes, and a less confident posture than I remembered. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us knew what to do. Then, surprisingly, he approached and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming, Dad." I briefly shook his hand, noting how cold and trembling it was. "Is Nathan all right?" I asked, my first concern always being my grandson. Michael nodded. "Yes, he is. Better than us, actually." A ghost of a smile passed over his tired face. "He has an incredible grandfather." Dr. Myers invited us into his office, a comfortable space with 2 armchairs and a sofa arranged in front of a large window overlooking the city park. "Please, sit wherever you feel most comfortable," he said. Michael chose one of the armchairs. I sat on the sofa, keeping some distance. The therapist occupied the other armchair and explained how the session would work. Michael requested this meeting as part of his therapeutic process. He has some things he would like to say, and I ask that you listen without interruption initially, William. Afterward, you will have the opportunity to respond, ask questions, or express your own feelings. My role here is just to facilitate communication, not to judge either of you. Do you agree? We both nodded. Dr. Myers turned to Michael. "When you're ready." Michael took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly together. "Dad, first I want to say that I know sorry isn't enough for what I did. I tried to take away your autonomy, your dignity. I lied about you in a courtroom, manipulated my own son to provide evidence against you. It's unforgivable." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I need you to know that I knew." I frowned, confused. "Knew what?" "That you weren't senile," he replied, looking directly at me for the first time. "I knew you were perfectly lucid, that was. Uncalculated." The admission hit me like a punch. It was one thing to suspect, quite another to hear the confession. "Why?" was all I could ask, my voice almost a whisper. Michael ran his hands over his face. "Money, of course. We were financially desperate. I lost my job due to corporate cuts, not incompetence. But the result was the same. Jennifer had to reduce her hours at the office because Nathan was having serious problems at school, anxiety attacks, falling grades. We sold the New York apartment at a loss. The bills just kept piling up, he continued, his voice becoming more choked. "I didn't know about your financial empire, Dad. I swear I didn't. But I knew the value of the house in Portland. The real estate market is booming, and even an old house like yours, in a good neighborhood, would be worth enough to give us a fresh start." Michael looked at his hands. "It was Jennifer who first suggested it. She's a lawyer. She knows the laws about guardianship of the elderly. She said it would be easy. Many children do this with perfectly healthy parents, just alleging cognitive decline. Without rigorous tests, with a few examples of strange behavior, an expert paid to confirm suspicions. And then we would have legal control over your assets." I felt a wave of nausea hearing the coldness of the plan. "And you agreed," I said, not as a question, but as a painful statement. Michael nodded, tears now flowing freely. I agreed. I convinced myself that somehow it was justifiable, that you were old, living alone in that big house, that eventually you would need assistance anyway, that we were just advancing the inevitable. "And Nathan?" I asked, thinking of my innocent grandson, manipulated by his own parents. Michael seemed to shrink even more. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. I manipulated Nathan. I told him you were becoming confused, that we needed examples to be able to get help for you, that it was for your own good. He covered his face with his hands. He didn't know about the real plan. He never knew we wanted to sell the house, get your money. He really believed we were concerned about your health. We sat in silence for a long moment. Dr. Myers didn't interfere, just observing, occasionally taking notes. "Why are you telling me all this now?" I finally asked. Michael lowered his hands, revealing red and swollen eyes. "Because I'm trying to fix what I can of my life. Because even if you never forgive me, and I don't expect you to, I need you to know that I fully recognize what I did. It wasn't a moment of madness or blind desperation. It was a conscious choice. And now I'm facing the consequences." He paused. "And because I'm worried about Nathan." That immediately caught my attention. "What about Nathan? He seems to be adapting well in my house." Michael nodded. "He is. In fact, he's flourishing with you in a way he never did with us. And that's what worries me, and gives me hope at the same time." He looked out the window at the park beyond. "Jennifer and I aren't good for each other right now. We're filled with anger and resentment. She blames me for the plan's failure. I blame her for suggesting it in the first place. It's a toxic environment, and I know it's not healthy for Nathan to return to that." Michael looked back at me. "There's an opportunity for Nathan, an exchange program in France. It's for talented students in sciences. He's always been brilliant in that area, as you must know. It would last an entire academic year. I would like your blessing for him to go, and your help to make it possible." It wasn't what I expected. "You want me to help you send Nathan away?" I asked, confused. Michael shook his head. "It's not sending him away. It's giving him an opportunity that will change his life, away from the mess Jennifer and I created. He can stay with you during the holidays, of course, but mainly I want him to have a chance to discover who he is, away from our shadow." It was the first time since the beginning of the conversation that I saw something of the old Michael, the idealistic boy who dreamed of possibilities before becoming the man obsessed with financial status. "Have you already discussed this with Nathan?" I asked. "Yes," Michael replied. "He's excited about the idea, but worried about leaving you alone." That made me smile involuntarily. So typical of Nathan to worry about others first. "And financially? These programs aren't cheap." Michael looked at the floor. "I'm not asking for money, Dad. I've already taken too much from you. I'm asking for your approval, your emotional support for Nathan. Jennifer and I will sell our car, take out student loans, do whatever it takes." I looked at my son because despite everything he was still my son, and saw something I didn't expect. Dignity in defeat. He wasn't asking for a financial bailout. He was putting his child's needs above his own, perhaps for the first time. "The program costs approximately how much?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Michael seemed surprised by the question. "About $30,000 for the whole year, including housing and expenses." I nodded. "The Anderson Foundation recently established a scholarship program for promising young people. I believe Nathan would easily qualify." Michael's eyes widened in understanding, then filled with tears again. "Dad, I don't—" I raised my hand to interrupt him. "It's not your money, Michael. It's for Nathan, for his future. Because contrary to what you thought, I've always cared about my family's future. Dr. Myers chose that moment to intervene. William, how do you feel about what Michael shared today?" I considered the question for a long moment. "Betrayed," I finally replied, "deeply betrayed, and yet relieved to know the truth, to know that it wasn't a misunderstanding or a distorted perception of reality, but a conscious choice." I looked at Michael. That somehow makes everything clearer, less nebulous. I took a deep breath. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive what happened, but I know I don't want Nathan to carry the burden of his parents' mistakes, or mine. Michael looked at me, confused. Your mistakes? Yes, I confirmed. Susan and I made mistakes too. We kept secrets that perhaps we shouldn't have kept. We raised a son who learned to value money above all, because I never showed you that there was more to life than the daily struggle for financial security. Maybe if you had known the truth from the beginning, you would have made different choices. When the session ended, we left Dr. Meyer's office together. In the parking lot, I stopped beside my car, not the old Buick I used to drive to keep up appearances, but the Lexus I had bought after the truth came out. There was no need to hide anymore. Nathan has swim class until 5, I told Michael. Would you like to come have dinner with us? Nothing formal, just talk, get to know your son again. Michael looked genuinely surprised. Are you sure? I shrugged. No, I'm not sure of anything anymore, but I think Nathan would like that. Michael nodded, swallowing hard. I would like that very much. That night was strange, tense, but also the beginning of something new. Nathan was radiant seeing his father at the dinner table. The conversation was forced at first, but gradually we found a rhythm. We talked about the program in France, about Nathan's scientific interests, about small day-to-day things. We didn't mention the court, the money, or Jennifer, who had refused to participate in the therapy session or dinner. Some wounds were too deep to be healed in one night. Perhaps they would never completely heal. But there at that table with my son and my grandson, I felt something I didn't expect to feel again, the possibility of a new beginning. Not an erasure of the past, but a path forward that acknowledged the scars and yet still found beauty in continuing. 3 months later, we were at Portland International Airport, saying goodbye to Nathan. He would be leaving for Lyon, France, where he would stay with a host family while studying in a prestigious science program. Michael was there, as was I. Jennifer had divorced Michael and moved to California, maintaining minimal contact with her son and ex-husband. The judge had granted shared custody of Nathan to Michael and me, an unusual arrangement, but one that worked for our unique situation. Don't forget to call as soon as you arrive, Michael said, unnecessarily adjusting the collar of Nathan's jacket. And send emails regularly. And take lots of pictures, I added, especially of the food. I hear the French take gastronomy very seriously. Nathan laughed, looking simultaneously nervous and excited. I'll do all of that, I promise. The boarding announcement sounded, and Nathan hugged his father for a long time. When he turned to me, I whispered in his ear, I'm so proud of you, more than I can express. He squeezed me tightly. I love you, Grandpa. As Nathan passed through security, Michael and I stood side by side, watching in silence. He's going to be fine, Michael said, more to himself than to me. He will, I agreed. He's strong and smart, like his mother. Michael smiled sadly. And stubborn like his father and grandfather. We laughed softly, a moment of genuine connection. Would you mind having coffee before we go? Michael asked hesitantly. There are some things about the company I'd like to discuss with you. I looked at him, surprised. Michael had recently found a job at a small green technology startup, something that seemed to genuinely excite him. It was the first time he had mentioned wanting my professional advice. Sure, I replied. I know a great place here at the airport. As we sat with our coffee cups, watching planes take off and land through the large panoramic window, I reflected on the strange experiment that had been my life. Susan and I had decided to keep our wealth a secret to teach values to our son. In a sense, the experiment worked perfectly. It revealed the true character of each family member, just not in the way we expected. Michael had given in to the temptation of greed and desperation. Jennifer had shown that her commitment was primarily to status and financial security, not to family. Nathan had demonstrated integrity and compassion even in the most difficult circumstances. And me? I had learned that secrets, even with the best intentions, have a cost. That trust, once broken, is almost impossible to completely rebuild. But I also learned that sometimes, from the ashes of destruction, new possibilities can arise. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" asked Michael, noticing my prolonged silence. I smiled slightly. "I'm thinking that I lost a son and got back a different one, and I gained the opportunity to be the grandfather I always wanted to be." Michael nodded, understanding the complexity of what I was saying. "And I lost a father and gained, well, I don't know exactly what I gained yet." "Time," I replied simply. "We gained time to figure it out." Michael reached his hand across the table, not for a formal handshake like at our meeting in the therapist's office, but a more open, more vulnerable gesture. After a moment of hesitation, I placed my hand over his. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. It was something more complicated, more nuanced. It was acknowledgement of mistakes, of regret, of possibility. It was a beginning. The Anderson Foundation flourished in the years that followed, helping dozens of elderly victims of financial abuse recover some measure of security and dignity. Nathan returned from France transformed, more mature, more confident, with an expanded worldview and even bigger dreams. He was accepted to MIT with a full scholarship to study biomedical engineering. Michael found his way in the green technology startup, eventually becoming Director of Sustainability, a role that seemed to bring him a satisfaction that his previous work in finance never provided. As for me, at 75, I found a new purpose in the foundation, in mentoring other elderly investors, and mainly in the slow and imperfect rebuilding of my relationship with my son. And in my house, the same old house in Portland that had been the catalyst for this entire saga, I finally painted the exterior, fixed the roof, and planted a new garden, not to impress the neighbors or increase the property value, but as a tangible symbol of what I had learned, that sometimes what appears decaying on the outside may hide treasures within, and that it's never too late to start again, to reveal the truth, to let the light in.